Rebecca joined the Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health at the University of Georgia as the EDDMapS Data Coordinator in 2011. She graduated from Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College in 2005 with an AS in Agriculture, University of Georgia in 2007 with a BS in Agriscience and Environmental Systems, and in 2009 with an MS in Crop and Soil Science with an emphasis on weed science. In 2010, Wallace worked at Henderson Beach State Park in Destin, Florida as an AmeriCorps member, where she scouted and identified native and invasive plant species, presented interpretive programs, and developed invasive plant identification and reporting material. She has a particular interest in data sharing and preservation and works to ensure that data is accurate and broadly available. All right, go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about bulk data, so submitting bulk data and kind of how I work with it on the kind of EDDMapS side of things. So start off, why should people submit data? Just kind of in general, but a lot of different groups think, oh, I've got my own database, I've got my own thing going and it's working really well. So this is kind of to answer that question. It's really important to have a non-local storage for your data to prevent data loss. Some people just end up using like a cloud storage system, but that's just one way of doing it, just having, you know, a non-local storage. So not just your computer, not just your external hard drive that sits right next to your computer, but something offsite. Submitting your data is an easy way to share data. So in some cases, there are requirements that data has to be shared. So your funding source, your publishing source, data ownership rules, things like that require that data be available to the public. So this becomes an easy way to share data. The data is standardized to a known format. The data in EDDMapS is based on the NASMA standards. So there is a known format to this data. That means that your measurements will have units. Your coordinate system will be known and standardized, things like that. Also, by sharing your data to EDDMapS, you'll have access to some of those dashboards and visualization tools that Chuck just talked about. So you don't have to build all these things, they already exist. So how to submit? So Chuck and Kevin talked about different ways to submit data. So this is specifically talking about submitting bulk data. You would first click on My EDDMapS and then bulk uploads. It'll take you to this uploads page. On the right-hand side, we have helpful resources. So data templates, data dictionaries. These are to help you identify what fields exist, what data types are, what fields or data are required or optional, things like that. And then on the left, we have where you can click to upload your data. And then after you upload your data, you can view your uploads and what the status is and so forth. You will, on clicking to upload data, you'll drag or add your files to the file uploader, because that's what this is. It's a place to put your files. And then we currently accept Excel files and ArcGIS files. Information or metadata type files, just anything to help us interpret your data. Then you would click upload. After you click upload, you're going to see this pop up say, hey, we've got a bunch of questions for you. And what this does is most of the data that comes in there's no metadata associated with it. So this questionnaire is to help fill in the common gaps that exist with the data that's provided to us. So these 14 questions will ask you about the data and to make sure that you have all of the data included, you know, all of the required information, all of the files that are needed, things like that. So what happens after you submit? You go through the questionnaire and, then it comes to me. This says previously. So when I say previously, I mean, like, in the last, within the last, couple weeks. I manually check the data for issues. I upload the data to a temp table in our database. That allows me a space to convert fields and data into values that are accepted into our database. And then it gets uploaded into the data table with the rest of the EDDMapS data. So when I talk about data checks and data issues, I'm looking at, is the data complete? Are all parts of ArcGIS files present? So I've said in the past, oh, send us your shape file. The .shp is just one file of the many that are needed to interpret a shape file. So I'm, those are among the questions that are asked. Again, is required information there. Chuck talked previously about the who, what, when, where, and so forth. There are also other sometimes conditionally required fields like units for infested area and things like that. Is the data unique? I'm looking to make sure there are no duplicates in files. Many of the recent files I've gone through, most of the recent files I've gone through have had duplicates. One record, multiple records duplicated in the file. So that's what I'm looking for to make sure we're not artificially inflating, the issue that might exist in an area. Are the geographic shapes appropriate to the situation? I sometimes see autologger files come in. So, a point is dropped every, say, 10 seconds, 30 seconds as a sprayer is running along the roadside. And you have this huge trail of tracks along the way that, if you're just looking at numbers, will make it look like there's a massive problem of that species in that area, even though it might just be one stretch of road that has that issue. Another problem I'll see is where every instance of a species is represented as one record. It's just a huge multi-polygon that covers a whole county. That's not really appropriate because you're going to end up having polygons, pieces of the polygon, the multi-polygon, that are many, many, many miles apart. So that's not really an appropriate representation of what's going on. It also makes it look like, oh, there's one record of this species in this county. Well, sort of. There should be potentially 100 records. And then also we've occasionally gotten centroids that are centroids of the entire county itself. And in some of the questions we've already gotten about accuracy of points, that will just confuse the people whose job it is to follow up on these points. So, those are the types of things. This is a very small list so far of the types of things I look for, but any of these questions I have, I'll then work with the uploader on answering them. So just to give you a very small look into kind of the thought process that goes behind the files that are submitted. So what we can do now, we being currently me, is I have an interface where I can take the files that are sent and drop them in this file uploader here. And when I upload it, I get this pop-up. I get to look at a preview of the records, and that's the file on the left is an amalgamation of different, it was a test file. And then on the right, it helps me to match the field that came in with the field that it matches in our database, and also assists with conversions as needed. As you can see, I can see the file, a sample of the file that came in. I can look at the field names. I can match them to the field names in our database. I can set a conversion. I can ignore some of the fields that come in if they're like, because this on the left, it'll have the scientific name as well as a common name. We don't need both names, so I can ignore fields as needed. With ArcGIS files, it really hates to have nulls if it's a numeric field, so I can set nulls to 0, so it'll not put in zeros where they're not appropriate. The other thing we have is that where required fields are not included with the file, they can be added in as a default value in the next step. So if all of the data came in as treated records, but that information is not included in the file, I can add that in the next step. But it also looks for all of those errors I was talking about. So again, I was specifically using an error-filled file in this case. So it'll tell me what the error is and where it is, so that I can then either fix the file myself, or I can work with the uploader on fixing the data in it, or requesting an entirely new file if that's the case, if there's just too much wrong with it. There are current limitations. So right now it must have shapes or coordinates. We're working on it. The next version will have the ability for just state and county data to be accepted. We still require a visual inspection, so I still have to look at the file. I can't just take it and drop it in. I've got to, are these autologger tracks? Are these county centroids? Is there something wrong with the file? Because some of these things we can't just automatically kick out based on the information in the file. We can't put in KMLs, access databases, things like that. We're still talking about Excel files, ArcGIS shaped files. We can't do necessarily ArcGIS databases because there's often relational tables going on in there and it can't parse that out. So we're talking about like the shape files, Excel files, CSV files, things like that. Controlled vocabulary options must be exact. So you can't misspell species names. You can't misspell the word eradicated if we're trying to pull in things where it's supposed to match something in a very exact way in our databases. So misspellings, alternative words, things like that will not be able to be tolerated. Currently, this might be a little confusing. The duplicate checker looks at duplicated data in the file and if a UUID already exists in our database. So if data is being provided to me with a UUID, it will check to see if that UUID already exists. But we can't do complex checks. So does this combination of location, date, species, and reporter already exist? That check can't happen at this point. It's a bit complex, but we're looking at version 2 to accommodate this. The main reason we started working on this uploader was to get Forest Service data in, so that NRIS data set that Chuck talked about at the beginning. That's updated throughout the year, but I can't work on it every month because it's many hundreds of thousands of records, and they're updating existing records. So one of the things we want to do is to be able to pull it, dump it in here, and the system will check for updates based off of, they don't use a UUID, but they do have what they call a primary key. So this is a system we're hoping to be able to use for things like the NRIS data set and other large federal or other types of data sets. It's also going to look for contradictory data. I mentioned some of that earlier, but it's based off of my experience and me remembering everything I've done. So I likely haven't thought of every single thing yet. So that's just a very broad view of the bulk upload and that data import tool. Right now, that data import tool is open to me. At some point, once we get through version 2, at the very least, we have talked about opening it up to some of our state partners for them to essentially assign people, I don't know what status they would be, but someone to be kind of I'm the data person for my state, and they'll work with the county people or below, city, regional, whatever, to get data in and put it in on their behalf. So that would be the next step, but that's after version 2 and after more testing is done and so forth. We might have time for one question. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box yet. So we might be on time. As they come in, I'll yes, please. Yes, add a GUID, add a UUID to your data, because again, someone just asked, should that be added? Yes. That means that you have a copy of the exact record to talk about with me. If I create it, it's okay, but there could be some communication errors if you don't create it on your end to begin with. Do all GIS shape fields have the needed fields, or do they lack the proper fields? The if you're talking about data submitted to me, it's whatever the person who created that file puts in there. I've gotten where it's literally just a shape and there's no other information associated with that file. So it's in the helpful resources I mentioned. We do include it's a spreadsheet, and it tells you, what fields are required. So if you're looking to build a GIS shapefile, then you can use those resources to help guide you on what fields would be required. Is there a video on how to create a GUID or a UUID? Most software will you can search on Google for how to do that. There's also websites out there that I need to create 200 UUID or GUIDs, and it'll spit them out for you, and you can copy and paste them into like Excel or something like that. But they're in the NASMA mapping standards at the back of it. I believe there are a number of links provided that help you to create UUID in, I think, 2 or 3 different types of software.
All right, thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll take a look actually when we get into our next presentation, if I can find that file and share it.